There are forces out there in the world at the moment that want to remove the scrum completely. They feel that it's slowing the game down and that they feel that it's taking away the attractiveness of the game. I don't agree on that. There are parents out there that don't know what is happening in the scrum and they have a burning desire to help their children become better scrummagers. And then there are coaches who don't have a clue what they are doing and they're teaching players the wrong things, resorting to cheat codes so that they can get the unfair advantage in the scrum. All right, guys, welcome to another episode here on the Coach G Show. Today is a solo episode. I'm GURTHRO Steenkamp, former international rugby player, World Cup winner with South Africa, and also 2 times European champion as a coach. I decided to do the solo episode today because there are so many questions around the scrum at the moment, so many talks about it. There have been recent seminars about it and why to remove it, and I wanted to talk a bit about that today. But before I do that, I want to talk about the Scrum Dominator Mindset. So a lot of you guys have probably seen on my social media platforms, I've been talking about Scrum Dominator Mindset workshops and Scrum Dominator Mindset courses, all these type of things. But first and foremost, I thought I'd take the time to explain to you what it's all about. So originally, the Scrum Dominator Mindset was something which I created to help players and coaches to find solutions in the scrum, to have more consistent performances and eventually lead to those dominant performances. At the end of the day, we all want to dominate the scrum, but it's not always the only outcome. There are positive outcomes. We need to look at progress. We need to learn how to track our progress. But the Scrum Dominator Mindset is the burning desire to do what is necessary to get those desired outcomes in the scrum. You need to work hard. You need to understand the scrum. You need to be strong functionally in the scrum. It's not just about pushing weights and doing bicep curls. So that is my job. In the Scrum Dominator Mindset, I educate players and I educate coaches on what they need to do in order to level up in the scrum. But as time has evolved, the Scrum Dominator Mindset changed. It transformed. It's not just about the scrum. And I realized that everything that I'm teaching players and coaches, it's so much more. It's about having the right mindset. It's about having organization, being conscious of what you're doing, being consistent with your efforts, that compound interest. It's so much more. I'll give you guys an example. So I've been advising a lot of my players to start developing new habits, and I'll share a few of them. I got them to start bullet journaling, which is massive. So the whole purpose of bullet journaling is not writing out sentences. It's like short bullet points of what's happening in your day, key events, how you're feeling, what you're doing well, and setting out a clear action plan on a daily basis. And doesn't have to be a long list. And that helps players to stay accountable and give them clarity and help them to create intention. I'll give you an example. So when a player wakes up in the morning, what a lot of rugby players do, they just wake up, jump in a shower, rush off to training. When they get to the club, they're still sleepy. So what my players do, the players who I coach and mentor in the Scrum Dominator Mindset, they wake up in the morning, they hydrate, they take some time for themselves, they avoid their phones, no social media, they start their bullet journal process, right? Either they write out a full page in terms of what's in their head, what they want to achieve, what they want to do, but then they break it down. Okay, what are the goals for today? What are my priorities? What's waiting for me? What's the program for the day? Okay, we got a split session. I got a weight session. I got a collective session. Today's attack focused. What do I need to review? Take some time, review my line-out menus. So giving the players a clear and concise process every single morning, which will help them not only to prime their mind, but also prime their body. Players do stretching. Some of them do meditation. But bullet journaling has become a key component of a Scrum Dominator Mindset, because the great thing about that, it allows players to track their progress. It allows players to see why they didn't perform. Maybe they had the late night playing PlayStation in a week, or they had the late night out partying and it affected all their energy levels. But I also started to encourage players and coaches to start reading more, starting their day by reading. Activating their brain. One of our biggest assets is our brain. I've been sharing this for a long time, and we tend to neglect it due to poor sleep and not training correctly, not eating correctly, and not stimulating it on a cognitive level, which is important. So the reason for that, it teaches players to concentrate early in the morning, it activates their brain. So by the time when they get to the club, they are capable of absorbing all the information. So these are a few of the tools that I started sharing with players in order to help them to have that mindset, the Scrum Dominator mindset. Yes, I do share with players the ins and outs of the scrums, how to develop their own routines, how to bounce back from poor performance. Because at the end of the day, scrums is not perfect. It's different. You got to deal with a lot of things. You got to deal with the cheat codes of the opposition, which I'll talk about in a bit. But you also got to deal with being penalized, or you didn't have the greatest performance and you need to bounce back. And the only way you can do that is by having a clear process and having a clear routine. But that's basically in a nutshell what it's all about, and I'll talk about more about it in the end of the podcast. But the Scrum Dominator mindset can be adapted by anybody. You can be a dad, you can be working in the corporate space, but it's about understanding, what am I doing wrong? What is my purpose? What is my vision? And what is the vehicle that's going to get me there? Right? That is very important. If you don't understand what you want to do and why you're doing it, you'll be constantly working like a headless chicken. This is something which I share on a regular basis.
Quick one, before we get into it, I'm proud to welcome USN as a sponsor of the podcast. USN is a global leader in sports nutrition, and I've trusted their products since my playing days. And now we're reconnecting in this new chapter. Their message is simple: find your greatness, because champions don't leave performance to chance, they fuel it. Big thanks to USN for backing the show. Now let's get stuck into today's episode.
All right, so now I want to deep dive in a bit to the Scrum. Okay, the Scrum. A lot of people have asked me, gee, can you maybe share us about how the Scrum works, what's going on? I'll do my best, because otherwise we're going to be here for a very long time. And I'll try to explain it in layman terms and not in the, how can I say, the Scrum specialist perspective. We are all passionate about the Scrum, and it's been really sad to see that there are so many countries pushing to have the Scrum removed or getting it. At the end of the day, rugby, it's about values. It's about tradition. It's about the fight. It's a collision sport. Imagine in boxing, you start removing blows to the head. You're not allowed to hit the guy in the face. All right. How will that change the game? So I do believe, and this is just my point of view, if you want to have less scrums in a game, improve the skill set of the players, less knock-ons, better handling skills. There were a few games in the Six Nations recently where I saw there were very little scrums, and that was due to less knock-ons. So coaches, work on the, sorry for my language, fucking handling skills of the players. All right, sorry. It's a sensitive topic for me. Oh, I'm going to get carried away. But anyway, what is a scrum? So let's maybe start there, and what is it all about? So for all the parents listening and people who are new to the sport. All right. So they have what we call a setup routine. That's when they come together. They're binding. You got the front row. So those are the slightly bigger boys and bigger boned boys like me. Then you got the second row, which is the locks. And then you got the flankers and the eightmen. They're all interconnecting. So I'm not going to show clips, but just to explain to you, the front row is 3 players, the second row, 2 players behind them. And then the flankers are linking up onto the second row, and the 8th man goes in between the 2 locks. So the scrum, there's contact. So obviously it differentiates in terms of age levels and senior, but let's say at senior level, there's a full-on head. So that means 2 packs are colliding, 8v8. And that's where it's important. The players that are in the oven, or in the heart of the scrum as we call them, they need to be capable of generating power and harnessing power. They need to be able to absorb that shot. And that's how you protect players. So the goal of the scrum is to launch your attack. It's to get the ball. It's to put your team, the opponents under pressure. It's about, how can I say, making a statement, breaking opponents down physically and mentally. The scrum has been part of the game for so long. Yes, the rules have changed and it is involved. But there's no better feeling for a front row rugby player when a scrum goes forward, when it gets that forward momentum. We know here in France, the scrum is everything. And in France, when they want people to push, they shout, poussez, poussez. All right, that means to push. All right, those are not the words you guys are thinking about. So the scrum, It creates just an inclusive culture. We all know rugby. We talk about a lot of players play rugby because they want to be active. Let me start here. When I was at school, and I'll be honest with you guys, I didn't have a lot of friends. Right? I grew up. I was the only child at this stage, but I only started playing rugby at the age of 13. I was a slightly overweight child. I was slightly chubby. I was mocked and made fun about and called names when I was younger. And that wasn't easy for me, and that wasn't tough. And also take into consideration, what South Africa was going through that stage. It was kind of weird being a person of color in South Africa at that stage, trying to find my identity and see where I'm at. But anyway, but then I started playing rugby. And I started out as a lock, but eventually transitioned to the front row when I was 14. But I felt good about myself. I felt strong in the scrum. I could dominate. I could destroy. That gave me a sense of purpose. I was an awkwardly built kid. I was big upper body, skinny legs, and it stayed with me all the way to professional rugby. But my thing is, if you want to take away the scrum, where are we going with this? Not everybody's a Cheslin Colby. Not everybody's a Kirtley Aronson or Sasha Feinberg and Gomazulu. What's going to be happening? Are we going to rugby league? What's going to happen to the players who are 140 kgs? If you look at all the players, if you take the Oxen Chair, if you look at the Winnie Antonios, there are some keepers. Look at Frans Malherbe. You look at myself. You look at CJ van der Linde, Owen Franks, just to name a few. The big question is, if there was not a scrum, or if the scrum was not as important, or you diminish the importance or the power of the scrum, would these players exist? Would an Oxen Chair be a rugby player? Those are the questions you got to ask. I played with a guy called Census Johnson, unbelievable guy. And, he was 140 kgs. Would he be able to play rugby? Where would he play if the scrum was not relevant or if the scrum was not important? So let's not underestimate the value of inclusivity when it comes to the scrum. It gives, especially your bigger players, your overweight players, it gives them a sense of belonging. It gives them a sense of being. And they feel valued. If you look at younger kids, especially at the age of 14, 15, they might be overweight, but when they do well in the scrum and they dominate in the scrum, they get that acknowledgement, they get that pat on the back. They feel like they're part of something. Not everybody can score flashy tries and have these viral reels on Instagram and stuff like that. But I know why people are getting frustrated, all right? People are getting frustrated because scrums are costing teams games. There is a lot of scrums and a lot of collapses at times. And you get teams blatantly cheating. And for referees, it's tough. It's hard because at the end of the day, they don't know what to do. So especially at younger age groups and at amateur levels, the referees don't always have the skill set to make the right calls when it comes to the cheat codes. So let's maybe just start there. I need to differentiate between dark arts and cheat codes. So a lot of people say all the tricking and the cheating going on, that's dark arts. According to me, that's not what it is. The dark arts is about knowing where you need to attack your opponent, how you can outpower your opponent, how you can use your body to generate power, what you should be doing as a loose head, what you should be doing as a tight head, where you should be applying your weight, applying and channeling all that power. That is the dark arts. Cheat codes. What is cheat codes? It's somebody that has no honor. It's somebody that is not truthful, no integrity. It's somebody that goes against the laws of World Rugby that says a player that deliberately collapses the scrum should be penalized. I'm not going to pull up the rules right now, but I might maybe at the later stage. But we see players boring in, going outside of the rules, deliberately collapsing a scrum, whether it's a tight head cranking, whether it's a loose head hinging, players stepping back, players refusing to engage, players refusing the pressure. And teams get away with it. They get rewarded. You get some players that are proud of that. They are proud that they get a penalty in the scrum, but they did not get it the right way, did not earn the penalty. So I've got this great community called the Scrum Dominator Mindset community. I share loads of free resources and a lot of chats, and a lot of players tell me, and I ask them, okay, right, so what is your goal this weekend in the scrum? What do you want to achieve? And they say, Coach, I want to win penalties. I'm like, is that it? Do we just do things in life because we want to be rewarded? For example, with penalties, sometimes we get people who are driven by just earning money. All right, at the end of the day, you got to earn a living, but you got to be driven by something else. I said, listen, aren't you maybe driven to help your team have a great platform to launch the attack? Aren't you driven by actually dominating your opponent and getting that go forward in the scrum? Because a penalty, you can milk it, you can cheat it. And that is the sad thing. And I think that's the big frustration going on. If you look at it, referees don't always know how to call it. And I'm going to take my hat off to a lot of referees that contact me and ask me and send me clips. Gee, listen, what are you seeing there? What are you doing? I remember when I was still at La Rochelle having great chats with the referees here in top 14. A real exchange. We have opportunity to send the referees clips and tell them, this is what we saw. Do you see this? Can you guys give us feedback? And even the last 2 years in top 14 and Pro D2, we would have actually like a big Zoom call where you have all the scrum coaches of top 14 and all the scrum coaches of Pro D2 getting together. So then we will create a checklist and we will clarify to all the referees the different cheat codes, right? So there's a long list of them. So on the lucid side, pouring in, walking around, hinging, the push down. There are lots of things that players are refusing to engage. What is the tight head doing? The cheat codes of the tight head. Boring in on the angle, kicking out his hips, walking around, cranking, stepping back, pushing down. There are a lot of things going. So that's why people are frustrated with the scrum, because it's no longer a fair battle and a fair contest. What I do like for some reason, and sometimes it baffles me, we've recently seen in the Champions Cup, there's a full-on contest and less cheating. Sometimes at an international level, it tends to creep in a little bit. So I think that's the biggest frustration. We need to understand, and I skipped a few steps, maybe just here to all the parents listening and to everybody listening to. We need to understand, in the scrum, there are 4 phases. Is the setup, the engage, the pressure battle, and the post-engage. So let's make sure the setup is when all your binding come together, all the players, all the different lines come together, front row, second row, back row. And then the engage is when both teams collide. Now the pressure battle, and the goal is you need to stay up. So there's pressure that's being created, time under tension. And then the goal is, if it's your ball, you need to get that ball out and you need to play. Or if you're a strong pack, you want to go forward, potentially create the penalty or create momentum so that the back line can get over the advantage line. And if you're on defense, the goal is to give your defensive line the best possible opportunity to put pressure on the opposition or potentially disrupt the ball. But you got to do this within the laws. But the big issue for me is it's player safety. We have brought in the break foot. So what is the break foot? The break foot is the right foot of the hooker stabilizing the scrum before the engage. In the past, the hooker was allowed to have both feet back and to have a proper engage. So in World Rugby's mind, the goal behind that was to kind of reduce the intensity of the engage, or the shot, as I like to call it. So rules have been put in place. The player safety is an issue. And I would love to have some stats in terms of lower back injuries that's happening in the scrum. And the shocking thing is, I'm seeing young players at school level replicating the cheat codes that they see at senior level. When we see tight heads deliberately cranking the loose head, when we see loose head hinging because he doesn't want to get destroyed, it comes down to honor. It comes down to your core values that you stand for. And I know I'm going to get criticized for this chat, but the reason I'm taking on this topic is because I want the scrum to remain relevant. I want the scrum to remain an integral part of the game. It's very important. But everybody's got a responsibility to play. So who is responsible for the scrum? Firstly, it starts with the coaches. The coaches, you need to educate your players. You need to teach your players on what they need to do in order to have dominant scrum or to have positive outcomes in the scrums and what they should do in order to achieve that. You need to give them different routines. You need to build it with them. Players, what is your job? Keep the scrum up. Create a fair contest. Honestly, if you're feeling good because you cranked a player or you hinged and you got won a penalty, shame on you. Shame on you. There's no better feeling destroying a scrum or destroying your opponent when you've done it within the laws. And yes, I admit, there were times in my career I didn't always have the greatest behavior, but I always made sure, or I tried to at least, to be within the laws. Because sometimes you do certain things without realizing it, that it's wrong. So, and then there's the referees. the referees, we need to educate them, but we need to give them good pictures. So that means we need to create resources for them on how the scrum works, what is happening, because at the end of the day, especially at amateur level, you got to understand a lot of the referees, they they never played in the scrum. They don't understand how it works. And I think, especially if I look at the modern game, sometimes the referees are clued up, but then the assistant referees are making certain calls which are not correct. So we need to educate the referees and the assistant referees as well. And I do believe this needs important because I want the scrum to remain relevant. We all love a scrum. And it's not because I'm a South African and a former Springbok, it's part of our DNA, because that's the other thing. I'm not going to mention the countries' names, but the teams that are pushing to reduce the impact of the scrum, all the teams are not that great in it. I find that shocking. But anyway, that's just my point of view. All right, so I'm going to move on because otherwise this podcast is going to be way too long. I've got a few things that I want to talk about. So recently I've been contacted by a lot of parents. So I've got, as I mentioned, I've got the unbelievable community called the Scrum Dominator community. It's available on the platform called School. In order to access the community, you can check the link here in the description here in this podcast episode, or you can just go to Instagram, GG Steenkamp, and DM me with the word community, and you will get an automated message with the link. So in this community, I share a lot of tips, but a lot of parents have been reaching out to me. I've got a 12-year-old son. I've got a 15-year-old son. How can I help him? I'm at a loss. And I thought I'd just maybe share some basic information with them to help them. So I put out a few points here. So I'm not just sucking things out of my phone. I actually did my due diligence beforehand to focus on. So parents, and I've said this before, there are 4 phases in the Scrum. But maybe let's start with the 4 phases. There are 4. It's the setup. So the key thing for you is your son or your daughter needs to understand how to position their body before they engage, before they collide. And I know at younger levels that there's not always a big hit, so they sometimes just folding in. Yesterday, I saw a clip on School where it was crouch bind and the players were just falling in. And one player had an A shape, the tight head. And I was like, oh my goodness, his lower back, it's going to go, it's going to pop. That's why players are getting injured. Firstly, we're allowing the referee, just lets it go. He said nothing. The teacher or the coach who was there said nothing. I was shocked by that. So we got to educate people about it. So the setup, you got to teach your son to be powered up, or your daughter. They got to be powered up. They need to have the right position. They need to have the right routine. They need to be square. Foot positioning is key. But most importantly, they need to brace themselves for the contact. So at each level is different. At a high level, senior level, there's a full-on heat. And when you're slightly older as well, but when you 11, 12, 13, 14, just kind of folding in. But players still need to be ready. And I use this term, don't be a marshmallow, all right? What happens to a marshmallow when it goes into fire? It melts, all right? Goes soft. So they need to be strong. They need to learn how to activate their core and activate their glutes. They need to tighten it up. Everything needs to be activated, the whole connect. And then on the engage, and once again, depending on the level that they're playing on, they still need to stay loaded. They still need to stay strong. There's time under tension. They need to keep their spine in line. Then a post-engage battle, they got to learn to stay in that fight. They need to learn to do those isometric holds, which is important at that level. But I would definitely advise parents, focus on the setup routine. So I know a lot of parents have asked me, okay, how do I go about it? So firstly, as a parent, this is what you can do. Study the Scrum. Study the Scrum so you can have an understanding of what is happening, so you can share this with your player. And obviously, if you go to my social media page and you're a parent listening to this podcast, there's loads of information there. You go to my social media page, GG Steenkamp, right? Or you just search me, GURTHRO Steenkamp, you'll find it. There's loads of information. I say loads of them. And even in my community, there's loads of information. I'll talk more about those resources in a bit. But you need, as a parent, you need to understand the Scrum. You need to study. If you don't understand, contact former props. Speak to coaches who know how the Scrum works so that you can help your player. Because what your role, and I know that, and the reason I'm saying you need to take responsibility as a parent, you might be saying, okay, but this is the coach's job. But let's be honest, sometimes you have a coach of a team. He was a backline player and never played in the front row. Or you have a coach, he's a volunteer. He is actually not a rugby coach and he has no clear understanding. So obviously, if your coach of that team is equipped, let him do his work, or let her do the work. That's the most important. But if not, as a parent, if you want to take a bit of ownership and responsibility to help your child, you need to educate yourself. And it starts by studying the Scrum yourself, watching games of the Scrum, getting a good understanding, being involved, for example, in my community. There you can ask questions, you can post videos and ask feedback and speak to people who know how the Scrum works. But then you got to get your child as well, your son, to also study the Scrum, also understand it, explain to them what needs to be done. That is very important. I think there's a few key things that I want parents to focus on. We talk a lot about spine in line. You got to keep your spine in line. So what does that mean? So firstly, before they engage, that means your hips, shoulders, and your back, it needs to have a straight line. It needs to be over there. Okay. That's the key thing. Shoulders, core, hips, it needs to be in line, it needs to be connected. That's very important. We don't want rounded backs. We don't want arch backs. And even post-engage, that's what we're trying to look. We're looking for the tabletop position, because when a player's back is rounded, it's putting a lot of strain on his back. And even when it's arch, it's got pressure from behind and pressure from the front. It's definitely going to strain his lower back. So, but most importantly, once there's been contact, players need to stay loaded. They need to stay engaged. So that is very important. I wanted to share that with the parents. And then the other thing is, I think one of the biggest misconceptions that players have and parents have is that, they feel a lot of the power just comes from the weight and general. It comes from the hips. Teach your player, your kids to use the hips when they're driving going forward. So I know it's hard as a parent. What are the things? What can you potentially do with your son? Get him to do core work, core strength, planking. Get him to do mobility work, bear crawls, and also something which I call scrum crawls. So that means it's like a bear crawl, but you got to keep your spine in line. And I've mentioned there, reach out to specialists. So what I would suggest, if you're a parent listening to or watching this podcast at the moment, I've got this great community. It's called the Scrum Dominator Mindset community. All right. So there's a free section which is called the locker room. So in the locker room, you can ask questions. So that means any questions you have, I will answer it, or there's loads of other coaches that's in that community that will answer it for you. But in the classroom section of the community, I have some free resources. There's a free Scrum analysis course that will definitely give you some insight. But most importantly, I will advise you to check out Coach G's Vault. So over the last year, I've created posts, rugby tips and Scrum tips for props. So in the Coach G's Vault, all those tips are listed. There are currently about 15 each. And that's where I would advise you as a parent, if you want to learn more about the Scrum, you need to get stuck into it. And, after some reflection as well, and I'm not sure yet if I'm going to do it, but so if you're a parent listening to this, I might consider creating a Scrum Foundations course for parents. So if that is something which you are keen on as a parent, reach out to me, drop me a message in the community or Instagram, Facebook, wherever you're following me, and I'm happy to do that. Okay. All right, guys. So just before we sign off, I just got some information I would like to share with you. I've been speaking a lot of things here about the Scrum Dominator Mindset and what it's all about. And my apologies for those of you listening who are not rugby enthusiasts or Scrum enthusiasts, but I just wanted to do this because of the huge demand that I've been getting on social media at the moment regarding this topic, asking me to explain it a bit, dumbing down. And I hope I did my due diligence. The only problem about the Scrum is it's actually very complex and you can actually deep dive. So let's talk about the Scrum Dominator community. I just want to say I'm super proud of what we have built on this community. So this community, why do I say we? Because I didn't build it. When we started out, there was maybe 10, 20 members. And recently we've gone over 1,000. And in the last few days, over 150 people have joined. So what is this community all about? This community is about empowering each other with knowledge. I'm learning in this community. I'm not the only one providing information, resources, and insights. We've got other coaches, people in different, and who is it for? It's for props, it's for coaches, it's for parents, it's for people in the corporate space, because a lot of the stuff we talk about is not just the scrums. We talk about rugby, we talk about mindset, we talk about life, how to bounce back from poor performance. The Scrum Dominator Mindset, it's a way of living. And the same integral frameworks that I use in the Scrum Dominator Mindset can apply to life. I've been recently, fortunately, I went to South Africa where I did a Scrum Dominator workshop, which has been unbelievable. And I really enjoyed it presenting in South Africa and really looking forward to getting back as well. So what resources are available right now that can help you as a parent, as a coach, as a prop to really take it to another level? And I created these resources because I realized there's not really a lot of platforms that's providing it. Maybe I'm wrong. All right. There are a few former players that are doing some Scrum stuff online, but I haven't really come across real tangible information, important information that can help players go to the next level. So I already just spoke about the Coach G's Vault, which will help players, coaches, and parents have a better understanding of Scrum and level up. So you can check that out. All these resources are available in the classroom in my community. Okay. You check that out. But here's one thing which I will advise players and coaches to do is the Pro Scrum Analysis course. Because in the Pro Scrum Analysis course, not only do I teach players and coaches how to analyze the Scrum, I'm sharing a lot of the foundations of the Scrum. I'm sharing the ins and outs, the little tricks, what you need to do if you find yourself in an uncomfortable position. There's some clear case studies. And for each area, I give a point of view for the coaches and a point of view for the props. Definitely check it out. And what's coming to the community? There's loads of great content coming to the community as well. Is the Scrum Dominator Mindset workshop replay. So I had the whole workshop in South Africa, which was about 4.5 hours long, where I worked with coaches. It was recorded. I'm currently cutting it up into bite-sized pieces so that it's easier to consume when you're following. So that will be available soon. And like I mentioned, I am considering putting together a Scrum Foundations course for parents and for props. So if that's something that you are interested and you would like me to develop, obviously I've done before the Scrum Dominator Mindset course, but I'm thinking of doing something simpler going forward to help players and coach, and also something a bit more affordable. Anyway, I'm being rambling about it. It was great to connect with you guys. I haven't done a solo episode in a while, but it's always great to share. And I think what I want to leave you with is this, because over the last few months, I'm doing a lot of reflection. I've been focusing a lot on myself as a human being, being strong, fitness focused, looking at all the data. When I say data, I'm tracking my sleep, I'm tracking my training. What impact does my training have on my recovery, my cognitive energy, all those type of things. I'm looking at how I can take better care of my health and also do what I love. I love helping people. I love mentoring coaches. I love mentoring players. And that takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of work. But I want to leave you with this. If you really want to achieve something, all right, and I'm going to share with you something which I've learned in a recent book called Limitless by Jim Quick. It's called The FAST Method. So if you want to really learn and level up, the F, that means you've got to forget all distractions. So if you really want to focus, so let's say you're studying for an exam, or let's say you're studying line-out moves, or you're analyzing scrums, whatever you're doing, forget all the distractions. Don't be on social media. Don't be watching YouTube. Don't be checking all your WhatsApps, your notifications. Forget it. Dedicate the time where you can work. So then you need to act. All right. You need to act in terms of what you want to achieve. What do you want to do? You need to take action. And then the S, which is the most important. You got to get yourself into that right state of mind, that physical and mental state to either learn, to either train well, perform well. And how do you do that? You got to get good sleep in. You got to eat well. All right, get good nutrition in. You got to recover. You got to hydrate. You got to train. You got to be active. But then most important, when you learn something new and you want to make sure that you solidify it and that you constantly engraving it into your brain, you got to teach it. So let's say, for example, you taught yourself certain line-out moves in the menu. Share it with your teammates. Share it with someone you know. Explain it. If there's a certain set piece move or set play, set piece play, share it with someone so that you can teach it, so that you can actually remember it. But anyway, guys, that's me. It's the weekend on the time of this recording. It's Friday morning. I think it's now 11:16 p.m. or a.m. My apologies, I am. And still got a big day. Got to finish up some editing for the Scrum Dominator Mindset. And luckily I did my run this morning. But I just want to say thank you to every single one of you that are supporting me on all the different platforms, whether it's on social media or here on the podcast. I really do appreciate it. Looking forward to getting to knowing you better. I always say the power's in the questions. Reach out to me. Join me in the Scrum Dominator community. The link's in the description. DM me the words community on my Instagram page, and you will get the automated link. All right, guys, that's me, and I'll see you guys soon. Ciao. Bye-bye. Bye.